Welcome back to my channel, God's Hands on the Wheel of Time. I'm Sammy McKee, and this is part one of my series on the righteous republic of the age, this bounty of the spring that is the fulfillment of the great prophet's teachings that comes about in a new world, an untouched world that is the closest that mankind will be to the Garden of Eden in any age. For the age of Pisces, this is the United States of America. That's why this is such an important topic to my entire work. For this episode, I want to talk about the founding of the righteous republic. For the United States, this is a period known as the 13 colonies, before it even really exists as we know it on paper. When the British start to come over to the Americas, seeking religious freedom, starting to govern themselves outside the reaches of the old world order and feudalism. This correlates 2,140 years before with the early Roman Republic, after the mythical kings had been overthrown and the republic itself is born. The Roman Republic was also this land of opportunity, not just that it had this open area to expand into in Italy, but also that it opened its doors and gave citizenship to people in this new sort of idea as a city. The New World during this time is a land of plenty. There are natives there, but it's sparsely populated, and the technology and culture from the old world had not yet made it to this new world. And so, like how America came and began to transform the landscape and build cities modeled on European culture, so too did the Greeks come across to the Western Mediterranean, particularly Italy and Sicily, and establish cities there that were carrying on Greek culture across the Mediterranean into this new world that was relatively empty. Although, again, there are natives like the Italics and the Latins. These are new Greek cities that are transforming the landscape. The same can be seen in Egypt. Levantine culture and the world of the Fertile Crescent was a lot different than Egypt. In particular, Lower Egypt was this land of plenty. The Delta was one of the most fertile places in the entire area, the entire region at the time. The Levantine culture began to flood into this area via trade, and with it the population boomed and grew into the Third Dynasty and the beginning of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. This correlates 2,140 years apart. Jamestown, the expulsion of the Etruscan kings, and the founding of the Third Dynasty all mark the beginning of this righteous republic in this first era of their history. Now, as time goes on, the righteous republic grows. It begins to urbanize more and more, but again isolated to this particular area in the New World. For Rome, around the central Italy. For America, just the Atlantic coast. For Egypt, just the Nile River down into the south, not past the cataracts. This is not an empire yet. This is a young republic in its infancy. For Egypt, various nomes. For Rome, the hills. And for the 13 colonies, the various colonies throughout the Atlantic coast. As time goes on, the old world goes through these various periods of infighting and fighting against a warlike empire. But back in the New World, they get embroiled in these conflicts. America fights in the 7 Years' War and even some of the other wars before that. Syracuse, for example, in Sicily, is attacked by Athens as part of the Peloponnesian Wars. And over time, this cross-cultural exchange between the Old World and the New World starts to make it so that the righteous republic can't quite rival Old World empires, but is starting to become more and more close to that point. And then a crisis hits. I call this the archetype birthing crisis of the righteous republic. For the United States, it started around 1750, just before the 7 Years' War, and it had to do with all of the issues that the 13 colonies had with British rule. This idea of taxation without representation, but also with the lines of demarcation and all these other things that the British were doing, creating a lot of animosity between them and the colonies that sparks the American Revolution, an obvious birthing crisis that leads to the formation of the United States by the time we get into the 1780s. Rome goes through a process almost identical, 2,140 years apart, where the invading Gauls come in under Brunus and they sack Rome. And immediately following, all of Rome's allies turned on them, and they went back to almost where they had been 100 years before in terms of their political influence in central Italy. They then go on for decades trying to reassert themselves until finally, around the point that the United States is winning the American Revolution and establishing the Constitution, Rome finally gets back to where it was prior to their defeat at Alea. And this is the culmination of Rome's birthing crisis that leads to their conquest of all of Italy and eventual empire. To be able to really understand Egypt's birthing crisis, we have to understand the characteristics of the age. For Ares, this is always obvious. It's a battle. Rome being defeated at the Battle of Aelia, their city being sacked, and then them having to fight battle after battle after battle for decades to get back to where they were. For the United States, this is more about taxes, representation, propaganda to get the colonies to revolt against the British crown, winning that war, getting France involved for diplomacy and espionage that goes on. And so all of this culminates with the creation of the Constitution. The American Revolution is very Pisces-esque in this way. So Taurus's birthing crisis for the Old Kingdom of Egypt illustrates the characteristics of the age as artistic expressions and economic prosperity. And that's what goes on. We see 2,140 years before the Battle of Aelia that Egypt is building the Great Pyramids at Giza. This is the height of the 4th Dynasty pyramid building, and we don't have historically any evidence that the people were disgruntled by this, but we do know that shortly after, the 4th Dynasty is replaced by the 5th Dynasty in Userkaf, who comes in potentially as a priest of Ra, or at least heavily influenced by them, and ends the pyramid building, or the Great Pyramid building era in Egyptian history, and begins to instead focus on, for example, temples to Ra, the sun god. This is a transition period that lasts as Userkaf comes into power around what it would have been 2,140 years before, when Rome had recovered from the Battle of Aelia, which again all lines up with American history as well. And so you see these birthing crises shaping this righteous republic into what I would consider the pinnacle of its righteousness when the United States is in its infancy. Now, don't get this wrong. There's slavery in the United States during this time. There are these questions that are coming about, but it hasn't expanded into an empire, and it hasn't gone through its corrupting phase that it will later in its life. And it is genuinely a land of opportunity, hence why Europeans are flooding across the Atlantic to get to the Americas. Rome's this same thing. After it recovers from the Battle of Aelia, it begins to expand throughout Italy, using alliances, eventually into Sicily, and that is the moment when, prior to defeating Epirus, that it's probably at its most prosperous, most righteous, I should say, an egalitarian society. And that's what the righteous republic is meant to be. It's supposed to be a godly place. And so whether you look at the United States and how it was an extremely Christian country living under what is supposed to be Christian-inspired documents and morality, right, this fulfillment of the great prophet of the age of Pisces, Jesus Christ. As we go back 2,140 years before, Rome is living under the 10 tables, right, this echoing of the 10 commandments, and it's following this, father god, Jupiter, and it has this state religion that's intrinsically a part of it that doesn't do child sacrifices and doesn't worship the emperor as a god. It's a very righteous civilization during that time, even though it has these characteristics of Ares and has slavery and has all these other things that it does via conquest that aren't necessarily just completely good. But it is this land of opportunity, this fulfillment of the age's best characteristics. The same thing can be seen with the Old Kingdom of Egypt. And this is where we get to the second half of the Righteous Republic's history. And so that's where I'm going to stop this video today. I hope that gives you an idea of the birth of the Righteous Republic and the birthing crisis at the end of that period. And as we get into the golden age of the Righteous Republic, please like, subscribe, and God's blessings to all. Thank you.